You see, the most important thing that we learn from our passage this morning is not the reality of temptation. It is not the nature of temptation. It's not even the way to overcome temptation. Rather, what we see, the most important thing that we learn from our passage this morning is that Jesus overcame temptation for you. He's not just your model. Jesus overcame it for you. You see, throughout the passage, Jesus quotes from a few specific chapters of Deuteronomy, which are all referring to Israelites' time of testing in the wilderness. And that is not an accident, because just as the Israelites were led by God into the wilderness and tested, so was Jesus. And what Matthew is showing us here in his gospel is that in all the ways that we fail, in all the ways that in our testing we do not obey, that we give up, that we give in, Jesus did not. You see, Israel failed to trust God when tested with hunger, and instead Jesus depends completely on God. Israel put God to the test, but Jesus refuses to do it. Israel turned to idolatry, but Jesus refuses to worship anything but God. You see, Jesus is not just our perfect model, he is our perfect substitute. We saw last week how in Jesus' baptism he begins his ministry of substitution, and here in the wilderness he continues it. You see, he lived the life that you and I were supposed to live. And he died the death that you and I were supposed to die, that we deserved to die, that we were condemned to die, so that through him, that in him, we might be able to find the life and the power to overcome sin that we could never have apart from him. You see, Jesus never gave in to temptation, but you and I, we do all the time. And if Jesus is just your model, if he just shows you the way out, if he's just your example, then you will inevitably be crushed under the weight of your inability to imitate him. That will be crushing for you. You see, if Jesus is your substitute, if you see him not just as your model, but also as your substitute, then when you fail, instead of being condemned, you get to rejoice in him. And what that does is it fuels a passionate response to Jesus, and it fuels a passionate obedience and a pursuit of him and his ways. You see, when we fail, if Jesus is just your model, all the verses that you memorized, they're just going to be a condemnation that Satan uses against you that you did not measure up to and that you did not obey. But if when you fail, if Jesus is the one you treasure and rejoice in because he is your substitute, if he's the one that you treasure because he was the one who was tempted just as you were, but who obeyed perfectly for you, then your heart will be filled with a love for him that grows in magnitude, that grows in fervor. What happens is, instead of running from him in guilt and shame when you fail and give in to temptation, you'll be able to run to him because he's the one that has the power you actually need to overcome temptation in the first place. You see, Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14 and 16 reads this way: "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly then to the faith that we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weakness, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are. Yet he did not sin." Verse 16 goes on, "Then let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." Do you see the good news about the gospel in our passage this morning? You see, religion says that Jesus is your model. Just do your best to imitate him, and that will crush your soul. But the gospel says that Jesus is your model. He does show you the way out. But Jesus is more than that. He is your substitute who has gotten out for you.